there's some sort of an equilibrium. That's an interesting idea to talk about. It's something that, say, a market has an equilibrium, the price, and it tends to go back to that price. That's also true of, say, an ecological system. A certain number of voles, and there's a certain number of wolves, and if you get too many voles, then you get more wolves, and the voles go down. And so these characteristics exist in lots of different kinds of complex systems, and you can have a more general discussion about that. Students they can participate, they can engage in that because they can actually think about it and start to identify some of those properties maybe. And then you can talk about the brain and the body, and then you can talk about consciousness.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Gabby Rosley podcast, a platform devoted to expanding our lives by connecting to the wisdom of the collective. Through relatable discussions on topics like communication, connection, leadership, science, and spirituality, we offer revolutionary perspectives and practical tools for creating positive change, right here, right now. But I don't want this to be some stiff lecture hall-esque vibe, so we make it fun, raw, and real. With expert guests and relatable conversations, my goal is to inspire you to break through limitations and remember that it is possible to live a life you're excited to wake up to every day. Thank you for being here and enjoy the episode. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're tuning into this episode of the Gabby Rosley podcast. I am so excited that you are here. If no one's told you today, let me be the first to say that you are awesome. And I see you. I see your commitment to pursuing knowledge, wisdom, and growth. And we have the perfect guests today to help you on that journey. Dr. Peter Bach-y-Rita is here to join us. And Dr. Peter Bach-y-Rita is the co-founder of an academic philosophy-themed summer program called Reason and Rationality at Princeton and Swarthmore. The program is designed to help students sharpen critical thinking skills, enhance verbal agility, and stand out in discussions and interviews. He studied philosophy at Princeton himself and then got his PhD in philosophy from MIT. He also has a law degree from Stanford and practices as a lawyer presently. And his mission was really to open up the floor for these kinds of conversations because it's needed now more than ever. The first time that I was reached out to by Peter and his team talked about the rising need for these discussions because of AI and deepfakes and cancel culture, creating this environment where Gen Z, which is a generation that I'm a part of, and many other individuals, even in older generations, are increasingly hesitant to engage in open debate and thoughtful discussion. God forbid they're wrong, politically incorrect, et cetera, et cetera. So his Reason and Rationality program has been gaining a lot of exposure and was recently recognized by the renowned Harvard professor and author Steven Pinker. So today we're going to have a conversation about all that fun stuff in the pursuit of increasing intellect by diving into philosophy. Peter, welcome to the show.
Gabby, thank you so much for having me on. The idea behind this program was that there are just so many mind-blowing and interesting ideas, concepts that students are never exposed to in high school or even if they go to college. And so I'm curating really, really smart and interesting and charismatic and warm graduate students who study philosophy, who have these broad interests. And we're curating the ideas that are the things that we think that students need to know and that will enhance their life to think about. And we're smashing it all together and putting people in small groups and having them learn this stuff. But it's not just going to be like a free-flowing kind of like, oh, what do you think, about, is there a God? It's not going to be like that. There's going to be some structure and some rigor to it, the kind that you would get from an academic philosophical kind of approach. It's going to be great. It's going to be unlike any other summer program that's ever been.
That's amazing. And I know that you just had a viral tweet recently about the 20 things that you feel are most important for these students to learn. And that kind of breaks down the structure of the course, correct?
That's correct. That's right. It's philosophy themed, but then as I've done this in the past with students, when I start to think, okay, what are the philosophical ideas that somebody who's young, who's a teenager, who has never studied philosophy before, what do they really need to be exposed to as we run through this seminar in a kind of relaxed, social casual way, not textbook based way. And as I started to reflect on that, I realized, a lot of the things that rise up to the top of the list, because we're prioritizing, right? We're really trying to get bang for the buck and have a really great experience. As we're prioritizing, I realized, well, some of these things, might be considered quote unquote philosophy, but maybe not, And so, for example, one of the things that rises up to that top of that list for me is if you have ever studied microeconomics, in some schools, some high schools do have an AP micro course, and a lot of students end up taking that at college. It's not philosophy, but a micro, what economists are doing is they're just assuming that people are self-interested and rational and are trying to accumulate lots of stuff and are trying to conserve their money to get more stuff. And then you make that assumption, and then the rest is just kind of like math, and what follows from that. And so it is in a way very conceptual. And I feel like young people should know that, and you can have a fun conversation about that. And so that's one of the things that we build into it.
Yeah. And I want to hear just a little bit about your gravitation towards philosophy. I mean, you've done a lot of studying of all the subject matter, of course, that you're teaching, but I just want to hear about what pulled you in that direction initially.
I'll tell you what happened to me. So in high school, I was, part of the kind of like, the nerdy kid clique, the smart kid, the smart kids clique. And there was a debate team. Okay. So that's how, sometimes the club doesn't exactly line up with, what the personality of the students, but, you all have to gravitate towards one place. Okay. So we all gravitated towards this supposed debate team, but when we didn't really want to debate, and we had a coach who wasn't being paid enough to force us to do anything. He was just kind of a cool guy, a smart guy who was into education, had his own theories. I don't know how the school had found him. They'd found him well before I got there. And we would meet with him after school on Friday afternoons, and we'd stay for 2 or 3 hours. And we would talk usually about the debate topic. I guess back in that day, at least, there was a resolution. We talked about the resolution on both sides of the resolution. But we just liked having these free-flowing discussions about the resolution. And we didn't really want to go to the debate tournaments. So we would go to 1 or 2 a year. We did pretty well because there were some pretty smart kids in the group. And then he left and went to Colorado and started charter school or something like that. And so we were left without a leader. And the school didn't get us another one. We thought, well, this is better because now we can just sit around and talk about the things we want. But we did not have the topics well curated for us. So it was a little bit of a competition to see, well, who can come up with something that's actually worth talking about. So much of education is having your attention directed at the things that are worthwhile to be thinking and talking about. Well, we didn't do the best job at that, but it's funny. I actually do have a memory, because I was talking about microeconomics earlier. I actually do have a memory of being, a freshman, maybe a sophomore. I guess I must have been a sophomore because, I don't know, because the debate coach had left by then. And 2 of the older kids, and when you're like a freshman or a sophomore, and like the seniors, are so different.
Oh yeah.
They're intellectually, and these 2 brilliant guys, I think both of them would end up going to Harvard. And they hardly, notice me, right? Because this twerp freshman or sophomore. And they're up at the blackboard, and one of them is saying, look at this. And he's actually doing like a supply and demand curve. It's like this occult piece of like knowledge that got carried into the the debate team that nobody had ever heard about this, but it explains the price of everything. And I'm like watching this. Wow. Nobody has ever told me about that. It's not in any of the textbooks. None of the teachers have ever mentioned it. I've, been alive for 13 years, and I didn't know anything about that. And that seemed worthwhile to bring in and import into the group and talk about. And so, yeah, that's kind of, so what I'm doing is in a way, and I've joked to my high school friends about it, is a resurrection of the debate team.
Yes, I love it. The debate team 2.0. The three that stood out when we were talking, and I feel like will resonate most deeply with my audience, are the mystery of consciousness, the moral relativism and realism, and then are we living in a simulation? And the reason that I feel drawn to these elements of your course is because it's really bridging the metaphysical with this structure and the intellect that I know you are so passionate about providing for the students. So it's almost like, okay, you're giving the container and you're giving the tools to be able to have these kinds of discussions. You're not just like, oh, what do you feel? You're giving the guidance to be able to uncover deep wisdom, of course, from within, but then also being able to provide, what you know and what we have learned as a collective society through history and other, avenues of knowledge and wisdom. So I want to talk about the mystery of consciousness because you're working with high school students. So how do you introduce this topic when you get into this section of your course?
Some of the things, especially the deeper philosophical ideas that we're talking about in the course, we may not have like a 2-hour discussion about the philosophical problem as such. It's very difficult to make progress. Maybe philosophers have been talking about it for thousands of years, and maybe they've gone forward or maybe they've gone backward. Some of these things are just important to appreciate. Okay, so let me maybe just quickly explain one way of thinking about the mystery of consciousness, and then how I would actually make a class out of it. So one way of thinking about what the mystery of consciousness is via what some philosophers call the explanatory gap. Okay, so the idea is that, every once in a while you see in the magazines or online, oh, we now know how people taste because this part of the brain was identified as lighting up, when people taste vanilla or something like that, And of course, when you reflect on it, you realize, well, that doesn't really tell me, even if they got down to the very neuron that was correlated with the sensation of vanilla flavor, it doesn't really tell you why people have that particular sensation. And so that is the explanatory gap, is this idea that no matter how carefully the physical substrate is specified, all the neurons, all the firings, all the chemicals, whatever goes on in the brain or the body, when you have certain sensations, even if that was specified for you, and even if you understood it as well as the most intelligent person could understand it, it would still leave you with the question, the open question. This is the gap that's unexplained. Well, why does it feel like that? Right? And so that's sort of one way. There's different ways of getting at this idea that there's something mysterious or different about consciousness. Consciousness just seems like a different category of things than everything else that's going around us in the world. That's an important thing to appreciate, because there's this temptation to think, oh, everything is just reducible to atoms and we live in a physical world. It's a material world and I'm a material girl, but yet there's this room, there's this daylight for a little bit of mystery. And that in that explanatory gap, in that little space, maybe mysticism enters in, maybe religion enters in. I'm not telling the students what enters in to that. And yet, to have a full life and to have a full appreciation of the universe, I think you should have an appreciation of that little space. Now, how do you have a class about that? Typically, the way that an academic philosophy class would work is you would read I don't mean to denigrate it at all. It's going to sound like I'm denigrating it because I'm being humorous. Okay. But, you're going to read, these long papers that are trying to make progress. That's what researchers do. That's what scholars do. They work on the hard things at the frontier that are very difficult to make progress on. Now, when you're a student, the important thing is just to appreciate it, but you're being presented with this very difficult, complicated 30-page article that essentially it's just relaying what I relayed to you and you understood. But it's doing it in a very complicated and difficult way with all this terminology, and then it's making a proposal that probably doesn't solve the problem, or you can't, it's just, that's scholarship. And that is a very important process for people to go through. That's how you get really good at understanding other people's arguments, picking them apart, critical thinking skills that really translate into work and into life. You have to do in the trenches and learn how to write an essay about it. That's school. And school is very important. School's more important than what I'm doing. But at the margin, students need more of what I'm doing and less of school, right?
Yes.
And so what we're going to do, or what I do in this course is less of the heavy reading and the heavy writing, more of this. There's some exposure to maybe the classic piece, that talks about the mystery of consciousness, which right now, maybe in this time in history, is maybe this paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" Right? That was written by Thomas Nagel, which you can kind of guess what that might be about, right? So maybe you read that, and then you have this discussion. Now, how do you have a 2-hour discussion about it? Well, maybe instead of trying to solve the problem, which is very difficult to do, and most of the solutions will immediately strike students as being disappointing, because it's very difficult to solve this problem. There are other things you can talk about that are related that actually have lots of other applications. So, for example, you can have a general discussion about complex systems and the properties of complex systems. So there are all sorts of complex systems that exist around us. There are markets, and there are engines, and there are things that are built by people, and there are things that emerge organically or through evolutionary processes. And there are characteristics that a lot of these systems have in common. And for example, a lot of these systems, there's some sort of an equilibrium. That's an interesting idea to talk about. It's something that, say, a market has an equilibrium, the price, and it tends to go back to that price. That's also true of, say, an ecological system. A certain number of voles, and there's a certain number of wolves, and if you get too many voles, then you get more wolves, and the voles go down. And so these characteristics exist in lots of different kinds of complex systems, and you can have a more general discussion about that. Mm-hmm. Students they can participate, they can engage in that, because they can actually think about it and start to identify some of those properties maybe. And then you can talk about the brain and the body, and then you can talk about consciousness.
I think that drawing the universal connections and the recurring themes, like you say, it's in econ, it's in ecology, it's in the idea of philosophy and the human experience, like on the individual level. And so then leaving that room, what you said in the very beginning as you introduced this topic is the appreciation versus the pursuit of solving this problem. And I think that having the appreciation for this kind of thing is the key to being able to then come to your internal wisdom of like making those connections without putting it out in front of your face that this is the solution. And I love that you create a space to do that, and really for exploration, because I feel like that's why these philosophical problems have never been solved, is because that's really not the point. It's for the exploratory nature of discussion. And so, of course, you're giving these tools. So it's like, all right, here's the spider web. You go ahead and draw the next connection. And you're kind of presenting the different components of this life to allow them to draw those conclusions. And I think that that's really, really cool. So when you are leading these discussions, do you tend to be hands-off? Do you let the students guide them? Do they ask follow-up questions? Like, how does this usually pan out?
So, that is so important. And, it is a dance, In order to run a really good discussion, you really do have to be tuned in and you have to be on your feet. I only recently discovered coffee. I mean,
No way.
pretty late in life. That helps,
Wow. Recently discovered coffee for wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's because I'm so sensitive. I've always been very sensitive.
So the
And
caffeine?
so, to caffeine and
Yeah.
actually to things in general. So that when I was first exposed to coffee, it was too much. And so I kind of just dropped it, I think, for most of my life. And then I realized, okay, maybe if I'm more thoughtful and deliberate about this,
Yeah.
I can. And then now I'm learning how to control it and use it and harness it. Okay, anyways, you asked a very important question. So, one of the things that I want to do is I want to have lots of different ways that students can engage. So you don't want it to be boring. You want it to be like a conversation that you are having, like with your friends. And so you want to be fast paced, but I also want there to be lots of different ways of engaging. So I might start the conversation with something that's like completely unrelated. Like for example, one of the things that we learn a little bit of like, statistics or probability, and we learn about the idea of a base rate, which is the base rate of or something happening in a population. We learn about different cognitive biases, and we learn about a selection bias. Okay, selection bias is you may be biased in your judgment about a certain generality based on having a miscued sample.
Yep.
Right. So, like, for example, people who listen to this show might have lots of successful people come on because they're talking to you and you're a podcaster and think, well, I should follow the advice of all these successful people. But there's a bias there because you're talking to successful people and maybe they all have a certain point of view. Maybe you should talk to people who weren't as successful. They'll have a different point of view, right? So that's something that people always have to be aware of, the selection bias. So there's a famous example of a selection bias, which I actually learned on an old radio show called Car Talk. And what the way that this was set up was these two garrulous laughing hosts on this NPR radio show. They talked about the bombing pilot comes back from the bombing raid, and they've lost a tremendous number of their bombers. It's been terrible. And the officer walks up to them and says, okay, where did the enemy fighters come from? And the returning pilot says, well, they came from above and in front. Okay, so tell everybody who's going out to watch out for the bombers to come from the fighters. They come from above and in front. And then from the inky shadows comes this murky character, and he says, don't listen to that. Because the bombers that came back, they're the ones that saw fighters coming from up and in front. The bombers that didn't come back, who knows where those fighter planes came from? So there's a selection bias. So we have a discussion about this now. But getting back to your question, how do I present this? Okay, so what I'll do is sit down with the kids, and I had a projector this one time I did it, and I put up on the wall a picture of a Quonset hut. Okay, because when you're listening to the radio show, when I play this little clip from the radio show, these two guys who are just like, they're always tripping over themselves laughing. And they're telling the story, but they're telling it in such an exaggerated way that they're having a gas doing it. And they keep talking about the Quonset hut. The Quonset hut, right? And so I put up a picture of a Quonset hut, and I say, what is this? And it's like, oh, okay. Or don't put up the picture, right? And say, hey, who knows what a Quonset hut is? Right? It's a kind of a funny name, right? Okay, we'll talk about a Quonset hut. Maybe talk for just a couple of minutes about Quonset huts and what they were for. And okay, and World War II. Or just have a conversation, right? But you don't let it drag.
Yep.
Right? But there's multiple ways for students to engage in this conversation, because you might have one dorky kid who's really into military history.
Yes, I love that. It's the pursuit of you trying to engage the students from different backgrounds and different personalities and different interests. Because when we talked about in the very intro to kind of who you are and your mission of having more open discussions, because the students in this generation are nervous or hesitant to speak up, not only because they're worried about being canceled or being wrong or whatever. It's oftentimes when you're in a classroom setting that is tailored to one specific, I don't know, history or econ or something. The people who know a lot about history or know a lot about econ, yeah, they're going to be vocal. But I love the fact that you are creating a space for diverse perspectives and experiences and input, because you have a group of students that is so diverse in who they are and what they bring to the table. And so I love that you're really grabbing at every opportunity for each person to share. I love that.
Every opportunity, and keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving.
Love
and
that.
Then they can have and then they'll also get, the important thing is they will also get a nugget, right?
Yes.
There's like a reward. There's a treat at the end of this. They don't have to wait too long for it. They'll get a treat. They will get a concrete piece of usable information that their friends and their parents don't know. They will know what a selection bias is. Right? Oh, now I know what selection bias is. And I had a great example. We'll do another example. But let the conversation wander so the kids can talk about other interests or say funny things or make jokes, and then bring it back. So that by the time people are out of there, they've interacted, they've had a gas, they've joked a few times. But here's the important thing. It hasn't just been kind of like this like random walk. Like, what do you feel? Or what do you think?
For sure.
It's been guided. It's been guided. And to the extent possible, I also want there to be a feeling when you walk away, like there is a very specific, concrete, cool, it's kind of a TED Talk kind of a feeling. You know what I mean? Like you watch a TED Talk, you're like, wow, that was so cool. That blew my mind, right? Well, TED Talks can be a little bit speculative and a little bit gimmicky though, right? I mean, let's be honest. If you're going to have thousands and thousands of TED Talks, they're going to start to kind of drift in the direction of like, okay, that sounded like that was like the one thing that you need to do in order to like get your relationship back on track or whatever people care about. But yeah, maybe not, I love TED Talks, right?
Yes.
What I'm curating in the course are ideas and concepts that there's no gimmicky nature to it. This is foundational stuff.
Yes.
This is, if you ask any Nobel Prize winning economists, psychologists, come up with the list of, kind of 20 core foundational ideas in logic or probability economics, the things that the big questions, the big philosophical questions. It's a list. It's the list. You get disagreement. That's what my tweet was about, right? Yep. That's how I got mini viral on Twitter, is like, what are the 20 things, right? And I put out my 20 ideas, and other people had great ideas, but it's not like it's that controversial, which is, and the funny thing is, well, why hasn't anybody ever curated that list before? And then turned that into a course, and then done these discussions with young people.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing.
I love that. It's super, super revolutionary, honestly. A term that's come up, and I've talked to just my dad because we're both interested in these kinds of topics, but the idea of situational ethics as well, and just how we can recognize in ourselves, maybe not as easy as we're able to recognize in other people initially, when we are or they are employing situational ethics. So it's like, okay, you can rationalize your stance on an issue or your actions and behaviors because the underlying cause or reason for pursuit has moral value and is written on your heart. But then in a different context or in a different situation, you might criticize someone for acting in a way because you don't understand their moral code. Or in a very similar situation, you might say, no, that's not okay. But it's because you don't have an underlying connection to maybe the result. Or I don't know, kind of just making excuses. So it's this idea of situational ethics, which I think it's also an interesting concept to ponder for the individual, because it's like, when do I have to employ rationalization, and to what degree, when I am acting out of what I believe is right or out of what I believe is wrong? To what degree are we rationalizing our behavior? And are we molding what we say we believe, what we say we think is right, to fit this idea of a result, or like a reason, or a rationalization, I always think that that's really interesting. And it tells you a lot kind of about the individual and what they really value.
It does. That kind of inquiry was what the ancients spent a lot of their time doing. And sometimes when we talk about what it's like to be philosophical, we are evoking that. We're evoking that kind of delving into your own mind and knowing your own mind and your own self and your foibles.
Yes.
That's less what academic philosophy is about these days, as you can imagine, because it's professional academics arguing with each other. But that is something that we've built into the course because it's an important thing for people to do. And it's still part of philosophy.
Yes.
And some of the ways that we get at that is to go a little bit into psychology. And this is maybe the most speculative that the course becomes, to talk about why people misrepresent what they believe, why people may not even know what they themselves believe. And also to talk about the biases that people have, which is closer to what you were getting at, why people might be motivated to evaluate other people differently than themselves. So we have we do have units where we try to open up a space for students to have free-willing conversations about this stuff, while at the same time pulling it back to, okay, this is a concept. This is what you will read about, preference falsification, or this particular bias, that cognitive bias that people have because they're being selective because of some psychological motivation that they have.
And I feel like in, common, or what we consider to relate most to professional academia, it's like question and answer or problem solution. And so I think that this entire lifetime is an opportunity for us to experience self and to get to know self and actualize self. Well, self is it's already actualized, really. It's just if you choose to experience it or not. But I feel like this is it's an important theme, not just in philosophy, but in life, because life is not going to give you the answers all the time. And so when we're so used to being given a solution to every problem that we run into, every answer that is concrete to a question that we have on an assignment, then it leaves no room for this speculation that when we run into, I don't have clarity, or I don't have a set answer, or I even have this, oversaturation of my brain because of all the choices that I can make, what is right, what is wrong, then we have no tools, we have no experience to, depending on how you're raised or whatever, if we're basing all of this on our experience in school. And so I think that it can be easy to say, oh, well, this isn't worthwhile because we're not giving any, concrete answers in these discussions. But that's not what it's about. It's about this nature of exploration that I referenced earlier, because that is what life is. We're not going to have all the answers all the time. And anybody who's been around the block or been here long enough to confront a situation that doesn't have a concrete answer, I believe would agree with me that the speculation is finding the answer in yourself. And it's not seeking that answer externally, which we're so used to in professional academia. So I
absolutely. And I think the way to get students hooked on and get them comfortable with living in that zone where things are a little bit uncertain, or there's reasonable differences of opinion, or maybe you'll never get to the ground answer. One of the ways I'm hoping and I find to get them comfortable with that is you give them some candy along the way. You give them some things that are firmer that you can grab onto, or you give them, well, this is a slightly related topic. At least it doesn't maybe answer the big question, but it's related and it's a tangent, and we actually can figure something else more certain about, what I'm saying. So
absolutely.
mix up the candy.
The balance is so key to keeping the engagement and keeping the curiosity alive, and really the motivation to continue to explore these kinds of things, because it's, like you said, to give them some candy. I need the candy in my life. You have made this a space for exploration. That's what I'm taking away from this episode today, is just this theme of exploration is really ringing true to me. And I think it's really, really important with the guidance from someone who has the knowledge and has studied this and cares deeply about it. So I do want to give listeners an opportunity to connect with you, whether it's on Twitter or if you have anything online, any articles, please go ahead and guide them that way now.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabby. Yeah, people can just go to www.reasonandrationality.com, and that's the website for the group we've set up. And there's a link to more about the summer program. And feel free just to reach out. I think there's an email address on that website. I think it's info@reasonandrationality.com. And people could just reach out there. I put my personal cell phone number up there. People can reach out that way. Reach out however you want. I am on Twitter, and people can find me there, although I'm not sure what my handle is. But if they look, Steven Pinker recently retweeted, and people can find me that way. If they look
yes, I'm sure your name will be in the title of this episode in the description, so they'll be able to search your name. I'm sure your Twitter will come up.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Oh, well, I'm so thankful, Peter. This has been amazing, and I just want to thank you one more time. And I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, to Peter, if you want to get connected further. And I will see you guys next time on the Gabby Rosley podcast. Peter, thank you again. Hold up now, y'all. Before you head out, I need to say thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. And most importantly, thank you for making the conscious decision to invest in yourself and expand your mind, heart, and spirit. Because you showed up for you, you are helping others live better lives. Whether you know it or not, you are inspiring others daily. And if you're feeling fired up, keep the domino effect alive and share this episode with someone that you love. If you're feeling extra saucy, leave the show a review, because it really, really helps me out. And come back and hang with me again sometime. New episodes every other Monday at 8 a.m. Keep shining your unique light. I see you, and I love you.